A photograph, grainy and blurred, reveals a shattered cockpit canopy, its jagged edges catching the harsh sunlight over the Pacific. Faint radio static crackles through a damaged transcript, the last frantic words of a Japanese ace fading into silence. It was early 1943, and despite their legendary skill and ruthless discipline, Japanese fighter leaders were falling one by one, not to the feared Zero, but to an unexpected nemesis, the P-38 Lightning. How could a twin-engine American fighter, bulky and unfamiliar, become the executioner of Japan's finest pilots, shattering the myth of their invincibility? What did the Japanese command miss in the shadow of these losses, and why was the evidence so slow to surface in their intelligence briefings? Behind this paradox lay a clash of engineering philosophies and wartime necessity. The P-38, conceived in the late 1930s by an American design bureau obsessed with speed and firepower, was initially dismissed as too complex and unwieldy. Yet, as the war intensified, the U.S. Army Air Forces found in it a versatile weapon capable of long-range escort and interception. Meanwhile, Japanese engineers at Mitsubishi and Nakajima clung to the lightweight agility doctrine, crafting the Zero as a near-perfect dogfighter. The P-38's arrival over contested islands like Guadalcanal and New Guinea challenged this balance. Archival blueprints show a radically different approach. Twin Allison engines, turbochargers, a centralized armament cluster firing through the nose, and a robust frame designed to withstand damage. What drives a fighter's lethal potential? Speed, firepower, or pilot skill? And could the Japanese have anticipated a machine that defied their expectations so completely? Specifications etched in declassified technical manuals paint the P-38 as a paradox of strength and vulnerability. Weighing nearly twice as much as the Zero, it boasted a top speed exceeding 660 kilometers per hour and a combat radius of over 1,200 kilometers, unmatched for its time. Its armament consisted of 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns and a 20mm cannon, delivering a concentrated strike without the need for complex deflection shooting. Yet its twin-boom design created a larger radar cross-section, and early models suffered from compressibility issues at high speeds, problems that Japanese pilots would later exploit. Still, the P-38's raw power and range allowed it to intercept and dismantle formations that previously operated with impunity. How did such a heavy fighter outmaneuver the nimble Zero? And why did the Japanese high command underestimate the threat until it was too late? The first encounter unfolded in late 1942 during the brutal air battles over the Solomon Islands. A squadron commander's log from November 1942 details the arrival of P-38s escorting bombers, a sight that startled Japanese pilots accustomed to facing slower single-engine adversaries. Initial reports expected the Lightning to be easily outmatched in dogfights, but instead, the American fighters began picking off Japanese squadron leaders with surgical precision. Radio intercepts reveal frantic attempts to regroup as ace after ace was downed, their formations unraveling under a barrage of .50 caliber fire. According to memoirs from surviving Japanese aviators, the P-38's high speed and firepower disrupted their established tactics, leaving leaders exposed. How did the Japanese pilots, renowned for their discipline and adaptability, find themselves so unprepared? What failures in reconnaissance and adaptation allowed the P-38 to rewrite the rules of engagement? In response, Japanese tactics and aircraft underwent rapid evolution. Squadron commanders issued new orders emphasizing tighter formations and more aggressive engagement to counter the P-38's speed advantage. The Nakajima engineers accelerated modifications to the Zero, reinforcing armor and introducing clipped wings to improve roll rate. Instruction manuals from early 1943 recommended avoiding head-on confrontations, focusing instead on vertical maneuvers and surprise attacks. Yet, these countermeasures came too late and often proved inadequate against the P-38's superior altitude performance and fire concentration. Reports from intercepted communications show frustration and disbelief among pilots, some calling the P-38 a ghost fighter that appeared and disappeared at will. Why did these adjustments fail to stem the tide of losses? Was there a deeper strategic blind spot in Japan's air war planning that blinded them to the changing dynamics? By mid-1943, the air war had reached a critical juncture. The loss of experienced Japanese leaders eroded squadron cohesion, while the Allies expanded their air bases across the Pacific. A declassified map from U.S. intelligence illustrates the growing reach of P-38 patrols, cutting off supply lines and isolating Japanese units. Protocols changed as the Japanese command scrambled to replace veteran pilots with hastily trained recruits, a dangerous gamble against a ruthless adversary. Meanwhile, the P-38's role expanded from interceptor to long-range fighter bomber, delivering decisive attacks on airfields and shipping. The cumulative effect was a slow but irreversible shift in air superiority. What did this mean for Japan's broader war effort? And how much did the psychological shock of losing their aces to an unfamiliar fighter impact morale and strategic decisions? Each episode is a document I pull from the dust of the archives. Share your own stories. Many of you have relatives who lived through that time, and your words help connect personal memory with archival evidence. Stay curious. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode tomorrow. The shattered radio intercept from a downed squadron leader crackles intermittently, fragmented words slipping through the static. Lightning. Leader. Gone. Formation. Broken. The eerie silence that follows speaks volumes. Japanese pilots trained for decades in dogfighting finesse found themselves facing a relentless adversary who struck with cold efficiency and vanished before retaliation. According to a classified after-action report from a Japanese airbase in Rabaul, the P-38's twin engines not only gave it speed, but also a terrifying resilience. It could sustain heavy damage and still return home. Fighter ace memoirs describe a growing sense of dread, as if the P-38 was less a machine and more an omen. How did the psychological weight of losing leaders, one after another, affect unit cohesion? Was this an unspoken factor that contributed to the growing tactical failures? Visual intelligence from aerial reconnaissance shows the jagged silhouettes of P-38s slicing through the dense tropical clouds above Guadalcanal, their shadows briefly eclipsing the islands below. The P-38's distinctive twin-boom structure cast a menacing figure against the sun, a symbol of technological dominance that contrasted starkly with the sleek, single-engine silhouettes of the Zero. The complexity of the P-38's design was underestimated by Japanese engineers, who struggled to replicate or counter its innovations. An engineer's journal from Mitsubishi, found decades later, reveals a mixture of admiration and frustration over the Lightning's turbocharger system, a feature that allowed it to maintain power at altitudes where Japanese fighters faltered. Could Japan's industrial limitations and strategic priorities have blinded them to the necessity of developing comparable technology sooner? Captured American combat reports describe the P-38's tactic of boom and zoom, diving from high altitude with devastating firepower and climbing back before enemy fighters could respond. This method exploited the Zero's vulnerability at higher speeds and altitudes, where its lightweight frame and engine performance faltered. A declassified combat briefing notes how the P-38 pilots were trained to avoid prolonged dogfights, instead using their speed and armament to deliver knockout blows. Japanese pilots, steeped in close-quarter dogfighting doctrine, found themselves outmatched. A radar intercept from a Japanese air defense station, partially destroyed in the chaos, hints at confusion and delayed reaction times during these sudden attacks. Why was there a failure in adapting Japanese pilot training and strategic doctrine to this new form of aerial combat? Was it mere hubris or a systemic blindness to emerging threats? An archival photograph, taken shortly after a skirmish over New Guinea, shows a downed Japanese ace lying beside his broken aircraft, eyes closed, the proud insignia of his unit smeared with dirt and blood. His loss was emblematic of a wider pattern: the systematic elimination of experienced Japanese leaders by P-38 squadrons. Internal Japanese communications reveal a growing alarm, with high command demanding urgent countermeasures. Yet, despite these calls, the rate of replacement pilots, often young and poorly trained, could not match the attrition. An intercepted letter from a squadron commander speaks of ghosts in the sky and the impossibility of maintaining morale under relentless pressure. How did the loss of mentorship and leadership on the front lines accelerate the unraveling of Japan's air capabilities? Did the P-38's impact extend beyond the battlefield into the very psyche of Japanese airmen? A faded blueprint discovered in a U.S. Air Force archive details the rapid modifications made to the P-38's armament and fuel capacity, reflecting an ongoing effort to adapt to the Pacific theater's unique challenges. The addition of drop tanks extended its reach, allowing Lightning pilots to escort bombers deep into enemy territory and strike with impunity. This strategic flexibility contrasted sharply with Japanese fighters' limited range, confining them close to their bases and supply lines. A map overlay from late 1943 shows the creeping extension of Allied air dominance, with P-38 patrol zones expanding relentlessly. Japanese tactical manuals from the period, annotated in haste, reveal attempts to develop ambush strategies and night interceptions, but these often lacked the resources or pilot experience to succeed. Was the P-38's combination of firepower, range, and pilot training simply an insurmountable triad? And what does this tell us about the interplay of technology and human factors in war? Behind the scenes, Japan's aviation industry grappled with shortages of critical materials and skilled labor, a hidden pressure that slowed the production of improved fighters. A report from a factory supervisor at Nakajima highlights the strain of meeting quotas while introducing new designs aimed at countering the P-38 threat. Meanwhile, American intelligence reports noted the slow pace of Japanese fighter upgrades, interpreting it as a sign of weakening resolve. The P-38's role evolved accordingly, shifting from hunter of aces to purveyor of strategic air superiority. A T-14 recently uncovered directive from a U.S. Army Air Forces general stresses the importance of maintaining pressure on Japanese leadership targets, recognizing the psychological as well as tactical value of decimating enemy command structures. How much did this strategic targeting contribute to the unraveling of Japanese air resistance? And were the Japanese aware, even in part, of the deliberate nature of these losses? The relentless attrition of Japan's elite pilots at the hands of the P-38 Lightning was more than a series of isolated incidents. It was a systemic unraveling of air power that reshaped the Pacific War. The combination of technological innovation, tactical adaptation, and strategic foresight gave the P-38 a lethal edge that Japanese command struggled to counter. Behind the statistics and battle reports lies a story of shock and disbelief, a testament to the unforeseen consequences of war's cruel calculus. What remains buried in the shadows of these archives is the human cost, the pilots who never returned, the leaders lost to a machine they never fully understood. How do we reconcile the myth of invincibility with the stark reality of vulnerability? And what lessons linger in the silence between these shattered radio waves and broken canopies. The jagged edge of a torn flight jacket, preserved in a Japanese war museum, tells a silent story of survival and loss. Embedded with the faint scent of oil and gunpowder, it belonged to a pilot who escaped a P-38 ambush, barely. His account, recorded in a post-war debrief, reveals the chilling surprise of confronting the Lightning's firepower. A concentrated burst of .50 caliber machine gun rounds and a 20mm cannon shell that could disintegrate a Zero's fragile fuselage in seconds. Despite the pilot's skill, he described the P-38 as the demon of the sky, striking without warning and vanishing into the clouds. This testimony, buried for decades in a classified archive, challenges long-held narratives of Japanese aerial superiority. Why did such first-hand accounts fail to alter Japanese tactics sooner? Was there a deliberate suppression of unsettling truths to maintain morale? A series of black and white reconnaissance photos taken over the Bismarck archipelago in mid-1943 depict formations of P-38s circling strategically, their shadows sharp against the sea below. These images, cross-referenced with Japanese loss records, indicate a pattern. The Lightning's pilots targeted squadron leaders with unnerving precision. This was no random carnage, but a calculated campaign to decapitate Japanese air leadership. Allied intelligence-coded messages emphasize the psychological warfare aspect, aiming to sow confusion and despair. A faded operational briefing instructs P-38 units to seek and destroy enemy commanders, a directive that blurred the lines between tactical necessity and targeted assassination. How did this relentless focus on leadership attrition reshape the dynamics of aerial combat? And what did it mean for the survival of Japanese air strategy? Technical schematics recovered from a downed Japanese reconnaissance plane reveal frantic notes on the P-38's structural vulnerabilities, its large tail booms and cooling systems. Engineers debated countermeasures, specialized ammunition, new attack angles, and even experimental electronic warfare techniques. However, many proposals remained theoretical, hampered by resource shortages and production delays. Meanwhile, the P-38 continued to evolve, incorporating improved turbochargers and armament refinements that further widened the performance gap. A confidential report from a U.S. test pilot highlights the Lightning's adaptability to the Pacific's harsh environment, a factor underestimated by Japanese planners. Could the failure to field effective countermeasures be traced to a broader industrial and strategic imbalance? Or was it a failure of imagination in the face of unprecedented technology? An intercepted Japanese tactical communication from late 1943 reveals mounting desperation. Leadership losses unsustainable, morale weakening, need for alternative tactics urgent. Pilots recount the psychological toll of flying under constant threat from an unseen enemy that could strike with impunity. Some units experimented with night sorties and ground-based ambushes, hoping to neutralize the P-38's advantages. Yet, these efforts were sporadic and often poorly coordinated. A faded training manual, annotated with hurried corrections, suggests confusion within command ranks, struggling to reconcile traditional dogfighting principles with the harsh new realities. How did this disconnect between doctrine and battlefield experience accelerate the decline of Japan's air forces? And to what extent did cultural factors impede adaptation? Photographs from a downed P-38's wreckage show the meticulous care with which American pilots documented their kills, insignia painted on fuselages, trophies kept as grim reminders. These images stand in stark contrast to the Japanese records, which often omit the full scale of losses or attribute them to mechanical failure and pilot error. This disparity hints at an information war beneath the surface, where truth was as much a casualty as the pilots themselves. A partially decoded Japanese intelligence report concedes, "The P-38 is not merely a fighter, but a symbol of our failures." Why was there such a gap between perception and reality within Japanese command? Did denial exacerbate the operational crisis? A declassified Allied strategy map from late 1943 charts the expansion of P-38 range and patrol zones, overlapping with critical Japanese supply routes and airfields. The Lightning's presence forced a strategic withdrawal, ceding airspace that had been fiercely contested. This map, annotated by an Allied operations officer, refers to the systematic erosion of enemy air command as a pivotal factor in the Pacific Campaign's momentum shift. Japanese archived planning documents, by contrast, reveal a growing fixation on defensive postures and preservation rather than offensive engagement. How did this shift in strategic posture reflect the cumulative impact of leadership losses inflicted by the P-38? And was this the moment when Japan's air war truly tipped into irreversible decline? The relentless shadow of the P-38 Lightning over the Pacific was more than an operational challenge. It was a psychological crucible that shattered the myth of Japanese aerial invincibility. Behind every downed ace was a narrative of shock, adaptation, and ultimately, concession. The archives whisper of missed opportunities, technological mismatches, and the human cost of warfare's brutal evolution. In the silence left by the lost leaders and shattered formations, a deeper truth lingers. The war in the skies was not just about machines or tactics, but about the fragile limits of endurance against an enemy who saw beyond tradition and fear. What remains hidden in the gaps of these records? And how do we honor the stories obscured by the relentless advance of history? A faint, worn photograph tucked inside a faded pilot's logbook captures a fleeting moment. A Japanese ace, standing tall beside his battered Zero, eyes shadowed by fatigue and uncertainty. The backdrop is a makeshift airstrip on an island lost to time, where the relentless presence of the P-38 Lightning had become a haunting reality. This image, unearthed from the depths of a veteran's personal effects, symbolizes the erosion of an era, where skill and tradition met the unforgiving march of innovation and attrition. As the war progressed, the loss of these leaders was not merely a tactical setback. It fractured the very spirit of the Air Force, leaving young recruits to face an enemy they scarcely understood. Final reports from Japanese command, fragmented and often contradictory, detail a grim calculus. The attrition of experienced pilots, the inability to replace them swiftly, and the psychological blow dealt by an adversary that seemed to strike with supernatural precision. Allied intelligence assessments highlight how the P-38's unique combination of speed, firepower, and endurance systematically dismantled Japan's aerial hierarchy. The Lightning was more than a fighter. It was a weapon of disruption, unraveling command structures and sowing chaos in the skies. What remains most haunting is the silence in Japanese archives about these losses. A silence born of pride, denial, and the desperate hope that tomorrow might bring a different fate. In the end, the story of the P-38 Lightning and the Japanese aces it felled is a fragmented mosaic of courage, innovation, and tragedy. It challenges us to look beyond the surface of heroic narratives and confront the complex realities of warfare, the unpredictable interplay of technology, strategy, and human resilience. As we sift through these documents and testimonies, we peel back the layers of history to reveal not just battles won or lost, but the fragile, often painful truths concealed beneath.